Good afternoon. My name is Mark Cantor. As president of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada, I welcome you to this afternoon's program, our first virtual lecture of the Saul and Florence Caney Lecture Series. The title of our program is Defining Anti-Semitism, the IHRA Definition. We are very pleased and privileged to present an international panel of experts to discuss the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. Locally, this discussion comes at a poignant time, given the recent developments locally at the University of Manitoba. The vision of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada is to forge a pathway to the future by preserving and sharing our Jewish history, and in so doing, educating the present and future generations. The Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada is located on ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory. The Red River Valley is also the birthplace of the Métis. We acknowledge that our water is sourced from the Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. I would now like to introduce the host and moderator, Belle Jarneski. Belle is the Executive Director of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada. Since 2013, she has served on the federally appointed delegation to the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, as a member of the Academic Working Group and the Committee on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial. Belle's 2010 book, Voices of Winnipeg Holocaust Survivors, is an important document in the history of 73 local Holocaust survivors, outlining their stories before, during, and after the Shoah. Through her work at the Jewish Heritage Center, she brings education on the Holocaust and anti-Semitism to thousands of students each year. Belle?
Thank you very much, Mark. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to our panelists and viewers. Normally, at this time of year, we would be gathered together in person for the annual Saul and Florence Caney Distinguished Lecture, an eagerly anticipated event in our city, which has brought world-class speakers to Winnipeg audiences. The restrictions of the pandemic make that impossible for the moment. However, thanks to technology, we are pleased to bring you the first of 3 virtual events featuring exciting and renowned speakers from Canada and across the globe. This afternoon, we will be discussing the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism with 4 of my distinguished IHRA colleagues from around the world. At the 2016 plenary meeting of the IHRA in Bucharest, the then 31 member countries of IHRA adopted by consensus a definition of anti-Semitism together with 11 illustrative examples. Now, in the unlikely case that any of our viewers today have not seen it, the definition can be found in the resource section of the IHRA website, holocaustremembrance.com. Building on earlier forms of the text, including the Ottawa Protocol of 2011, to which Canada was the first signatory, it was the IHRA's Committee on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial that worked to build international consensus around a non-legally binding working definition of anti-Semitism, subsequently adopted by the 2016 plenary. The definition has been subject to praise, criticism, and rumor. Today, 29 United Nations member states have adopted or endorsed the definition, as well as many municipalities, including quite a few in Canada, universities, and diverse organizations from the European Parliament to the Organization of American States, police services, football clubs, and individuals such as Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, and Ahmed Shahid, the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion or Belief. So, what is all the fuss about? As a member of the Canadian IHRA delegation, I thought that the best way to separate truth from rumor and innuendo would be to invite 4 of my IHRA colleagues to share their expertise and personal experiences with you. If you have any questions to ask the panel after my interview with them, please submit them via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screens. The Jewish Heritage Center is committed to engaging our audiences in respectful dialogue. We ask you to stay on topic and be respectful of others, as if you were engaging in a face-to-face discussion. So thank you for respecting the rights, differences, and opinions of others. And we apologize ahead of time if we are unable to answer all questions asked today. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome our panelists from around the globe. Alina Bricman is the Director of the European Union Affairs of the Jewish Advocacy and Service Organization B'nai B'rith International. Since its founding in 1843, B'nai B'rith has been dedicated to safeguarding Jewish life, promoting intergroup understanding, and improving quality of life worldwide through its humanitarian efforts. Based in Brussels, Alina coordinates B'nai B'rith's work with the European Union institutions, as well as civil society and industry experts to tackle anti-Semitism, strengthen European Union-Israel relations, and promote Holocaust remembrance. She is a member of Romania's delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Alina formerly served as president of the European Union of Jewish Students, the umbrella organization representing young Jews in 35 countries between 2017 and 2019. And prior to that, she worked for the representation of the European Commission in Romania and for Romanian civil society NGO, focused on civil engagement and combating xenophobia. She studied political science at the National School of Political and Administrative Studies in Bucharest and the Central European University in Budapest. Andrei Oboler is the founder and managing director of the Online Hate Prevention Institute. He established the Australian charity in 2012 and continues to guide its growth and day-to-day operations, tackling the rise of online hate. He also leads the organization's research into all forms of online hate and extremism and develops programs to increase community resilience and cohesion and improve online transparency. He is also an honorary associate of the La Trobe Law School, and he is part of the Law Tech Research Group and the university's cybersecurity focus. Leon Saltiel is representative at the United Nations Geneva and UNESCO and coordinator on countering anti-Semitism for the World Jewish Congress. He holds a PhD in contemporary Greek history from the University of Macedonia in Thessaloniki, Greece, and has been a postdoctoral researcher at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva, Switzerland, and the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. His publications include The Holocaust in Thessaloniki, Reactions to Anti-Jewish Persecution, 1942 to 1943, that was published by Routledge in 2020, as well as Do Not Forget Me, 3 Jewish Mothers Write to Their Sons from the Ghetto of Thessaloniki, published by Alexandria in 2018. Leon has more than 15 years of experience working on human rights issues around the world, the majority of which was working with the United Nations in Geneva. He was a Fulbright Scholar at Georgetown University, where he earned a master's degree in foreign service. He has received numerous fellowships from, among others, the Fondation pour la Mémoire de la Shoah, German Marshall Fund, Yad Vashem, and the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. He is a member of the Central Board of Jewish Communities of Greece and of the Greek delegation to the IHRA. And finally, Juliane Wetzel holds a PhD in history. From 1986 to 1991, she has been the researcher at the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich. And since 1991, she is a senior researcher and academic staff member at the Center for Research and Anti-Semitism at the Technical University in Berlin. She is a member of the German delegation to the IHRA, and since March of 2021, she has taken over as chair of the IHRA Committee on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial. She is also a member of the 2 German Parliament expert boards on anti-Semitism, a member of the board of the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute, a member of the board of the Kreuzberg Initiative Against Anti-Semitism, and she has numerous publications and lectures on contemporary anti-Semitism, right-wing extremism, persecution of the Jews during National Socialism, and Jewish displaced persons in Germany after World War II. And so it is my pleasure to invite the panelists to respond to my questions now. And please feel free to jump in with your answers and also comment on the other panelists' answers as well. So the very first question that I would like to ask is, why do we need a definition of anti-Semitism?
Should I start?
Please.
I think we need a definition on anti-Semitism, especially for the practical work. That was the basis also why the IHRA definition was created, based on a former definition, provided by the then European Monitoring Center on Xenophobia and Racism, which is nowadays the Fundamental Rights Agency, and they started in 2005 to let's say to give the basis of what was then later on the basis for the IHRA definition. And I think this it's so important to have this practical, non-legally binding definition for educational work, for police, for law enforcement, and so on. And I think it on the other side, this definition gives also, it's a statement. If a state or a football club or whoever adopts or takes note, as it is said in the German version, what the German parliament accepted, to give this statement that against anti-Semitism.
Let me also jump in, and let me first of all thank the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada, Mark and Belle, for welcoming us in this very interesting panel. And it's interesting how we have speakers from Europe and Australia and all meet in Canada. That's the marvelous of modern technology. So thank you again. I just want to continue what Juliane said and say that indeed, if you want to fight anti-Semitism, you need to define it. So I think that's the great value that the IHRA definition brings. How can we, anti-Semitism has been around for 2,000 years. It always mutates, changes face, has gone through, the ups and downs of history. And it's important to try and define it. And the definition, the IHRA definition, is such a great document because of how simple it is, of how it has the definition in the box, as your listeners may have seen if they consult the page, and it has the 11 illustrative examples, as Belle, you said, and they are written in a way that a policeman could understand them. So it's simplicity, and it's sort of like its ability to reach the ordinary, let's say, policymaker, policeman, educator, prosecutor, judge, educator. That's what makes it such a great tool, and that's why so many governments and international institutions have adopted it and use it in planning their actions around.
Andre, did you have anything to add?
I do, but I think I might ask Alina if she'd like to go first.
Sure, absolutely. Let me echo Leon in thanking you, Belle and Mark, for having us today. Indeed, it's a very interesting conversation. Very much looking forward to it, and glad to join my IHRA colleagues for it. Perhaps, just reflecting on what Juliane and Leon have said, Juliane spoke to the practical element of the definition, Leon to its role as a tool for understanding. And I think both of these elements are somewhat outward looking. They help us deal with outside stakeholders, with non-Jewish stakeholders. Perhaps one thing I would add, which I think is really important, is the role that it has for the community itself. I think it's been really a tool of empowering the community itself to say what its own experience of anti-Semitism has looked like, what anti-Semitism has looked like on a daily basis, on a very concrete level. It's empowered the community to really speak up about its own oppression. And I think that's something very important to remember going into the conversation, that that really needs to be the basis for what constitutes our definition of anti-Semitism.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Belle and Mark, again. I think I'm going to be a little bit controversial, if I can, to follow the previous speakers. And saying that, I agree with everything that's just been said. I come at this from a slightly different perspective. My background, and I apologize for not giving Belle a fuller bio, but my PhD is in computer science. Okay, my education in anti-Semitism comes from being on the front lines from my time as a student. I got my PhD in the UK during the academic boycotts of Israel. There was the Lecturers Union was blocking Israeli students coming into the UK. There were efforts to ban kosher food on campus. There were all sorts of problems that had real practical impact for the Jewish community. So that was really where I first got involved. My background before that was in Jewish youth movements, etc., but not so much on anti-Semitism. My time in the UK, my first day in the UK, was the first time that I actually experienced anti-Semitism myself. I caught a bus into town and got this tirade of verbal abuse from a member of the public on this public bus. And I couldn't work out how they even knew I was Jewish. I'd signed up to the Student Jewish Society and was walking around carrying a giant bag with a giant Magen David on it. But, you know, these things don't occur to someone that lives fairly comfortably in Australia. But my experience firstly highlighted, and this was back before we had these definitions, before the EUMC, it highlighted the problems with not having a definition. It highlighted the difficulty in getting student unions, for example, to understand what the issues are, to understand why something is anti-Semitic. I remember an experience where they gave every student society at a society's fair for signing up at the start of term. Every student society had a number of people that would staff the stall. Each one was given a badge. The badges every year were in a different color. They normally said X society on them. This year, to save space and ink, they dropped the word society. The color was yellow. So we ended up with yellow badges saying Jewish, that they wanted the Jewish students to wear. And when we approached staff, we were told, what's the problem? And eventually we managed to explain it to a student politician who helped us fix it. But these were the challenges with not having a definition. Jumping forward, a lot of my work is dealing with anti-Semitism in the online space. And even today, there are aspects of anti-Semitism covered by the IHRA definition, which social media platforms don't always accept. There are copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion that are still available on Facebook today. A definition helps us solve these problems. The point where I'm going to be controversial and disagree, I've also done work dealing with anti-Semitism in schools recently for our government here. And the reason I was brought in is because the definition alone only gets you so far. You need expertise as well. And, you know, that's where the definition talks about, for example, traditional anti-Semitism, right? But it doesn't explain what it is. So unless you actually have that background of anti-Semitism pre-Holocaust, unless you have that background to understand what issues with Jews and money actually relate to and why something could be anti-Semitic, the definition isn't going to answer that for you. It answers the most common expressions that we see today, but not everything. So, you know, I think the definition is very helpful, and then it needs to be interpreted. I think it's also, again, to be controversial, I think it's also very good at helping us understand what isn't anti-Semitism. And I've made that point, you know, particularly to some of the left-leaning Jewish organizations, where, you know, the definition is very clear. Criticism of Israel, that is the same as criticism of any other country, according to the IHRA definition, is not anti-Semitic, right? Further, the examples given in the definition, it says quite clearly that they need to be interpreted in their circumstances. So you need to apply the definition carefully. So I think the definition is useful on both sides. I've spoken too much, I will stop there.
Andre, thank you very much. That actually leads me into my next question, because we know that there have been countless attempts to misrepresent the definition by those who falsely claim that it would result in the criminalization of criticism of Israel, the so-called chilling effect as well. And I mean, we know that this is a non-legally binding educational tool to raise awareness. And as you said, the definition clearly states that criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country, including our own countries, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. So why do you think that this misrepresentation continues to plague us, if you'll forgive me for using the P word? And I might add here that we received a question ahead of the event from one of our registrants asking whether, according to the IHRA definition, does the panel believe that it is anti-Semitic to criticize Israel's policies and practices, for example, in the West Bank? So I invite you all to jump in and respond to that one.
I think there's a special issue with Germany, because Germany, the German version, which was adopted or taken note of, as the diplomats say, by the German parliament, lacks this special sentence. The sentence that criticism of Israel's politics is legitimate is not a part of this definition in the German version. On the IHRA website, yes, the German version of the IHRA website at the IHRA website has this special sentence, but not in the form in the definition which is now we talk of in Germany, and nobody really knows why this sentence was put out, and it gives so many discussions a podium now in Germany about this question, because it is, to answer the question of your webinar participant, it is legitimate to criticize Israel, as you can criticize every country, you can criticize Angela Merkel, our president. That's not the point. The point is where this criticism crosses a line, and where these borderlines are. I know that there are gray zones. It's not always so simple to say it's anti-Semitic or not anti-Semitic, because it depends always on what says who, for what aim and what background. So it is not so simple sometimes, but it's very clear that a legitimate criticism of Israel's politics is no problem at all. But as we as experts see, that if you have debates, discussions on Israel and on the Palestinian territories and the Middle East conflict, that it's very often the third sentence which brings then an anti-Semitic stereotype. So it's a legitimate, somebody legitimately criticizes Netanyahu or whatever, but if then the one says that is typical for Jews what Netanyahu has done, that then you cross the line. And I think that that's very important to have this always in mind.
That's a great example. Thank you.
I can jump in there as well. I think there's, I don't think it's right to say that criticism of Israel is, even the phrase by itself, criticism like that leveled against other countries is not anti-Semitic. Let's unpack that a little. Criticism against Israel under the IHRA definition is neither anti-Semitic nor not anti-Semitic. Okay, it depends on the context. It depends what's actually said. The IHRA definition cannot be used, you know, as a blank slate to say yes or no just because IHRA definition. The issue is that criticism of Israel, which uses anti-Semitic imagery, which uses anti-Semitic narratives, which uses conspiracy theories, is anti-Semitic, okay, which should be a no-brainer. Okay, something that is anti-Semitic is anti-Semitic. That's what we're saying. So the question is, where does it cross the line when it's not using such imagery? And that brings us, I think, back to Sharansky's 3Ds. And there are issues about delegitimizing Israel, where it's done not just to try and hold Israel accountable to the same standard of other countries, but to undermine Israel's ability to function as a state, its ability to defend itself, its ability to participate as an equal country to all others. That's one area. And then there's another area where we've got the double standards. And the classic example of that, I think, was the UN, where we had the UN human rights, Leon, this is your specialty, was it the Commission before the Council, where we had this issue where the standing agenda item was on Israel. And even when there were genocides occurring elsewhere in the world, every meeting had to discuss Israel. And then empirically, it showed that Israel must be the worst country in the world because there's 10, 100, 1,000, whatever times more resolutions on Israel than on any other country. And that mechanism, that fact about the resolutions and the discussion had absolutely nothing to do with the actual facts on the ground in relation to Israel. It was to do with Israel being targeted. And I think that does fall into that category of anti-Semitism as well.
But of course, I think an important thing to point out here is that unless a country has specific laws regarding hate speech, even if you were to say express something anti-Semitic according to the IHRA definition in the context that was used, it's still not criminally prosecutable. Would anyone else like to add something to what Andre has said?
Perhaps one thing I would note is that sort of the general narrative around this specific critique, that the definition is used as a criminalization of criticism of Israel, sort of suggests that it's come as a result of such criticism. Whereas the reality is somewhat of the opposite. Contemporary anti-Semitism came before the IHRA definition. Jews in the diaspora were having to basically pass a litmus test on Israel. They were faced with accusations of dual loyalty, denial of the right to self-determination. And those are exactly the realities that made the definition necessary rather than the other way around. And perhaps a bit of a meta commentary. I really think in these discussions, I think all of our organizations reflect on how to best react to competing definitions and so on and so forth. I really think it's important to remain proactive rather than reactive. Let's put our energy into reaffirming the value of the IHRA definition, into reaffirming the voice it's given to the Jewish community to express the bias it faces, the tool it's been for lawmakers and law enforcement and professors and pupils alike, and really to reaffirm the fact that the IHRA definition is basically the verbalized expression of the lived experience of the Jewish community. I think if we keep this proactive mindset, it will really take us a long way forward.
Thank you. Leon?
But let me also conclude this round of speakers on your question. Every morning I read Haaretz, and there is no more critic of Israel than the Israelis themselves. And I think that question, that reality answers all of the critics. I mean, Israel has a vibrant debate. You see now they're in the middle of another election round, and it's vibrant, and all the issues are on the table, and nobody's accusing each other of being anti-Semitic. So we have to learn, if you want to criticize it, there's so many things to criticize. We criticize Israel all the time, but we criticize our own countries. We criticize many policies, but that's as the speakers, as Andres and others spoke, you have to know how, you have to be careful of not using stereotypes or conspiracy myths or things like that. And if you read the definition very carefully, it speaks always taking into account the overall context, meaning none of the examples, even the ones on Israel, are to be taken face value. You always have to see who says it, in what context, what are the intentions. So, and that's why we stress that it's a working definition, it's not legally binding, it's a tool. It's not a legal instrument. And I saw a question in the chat, what does it mean, non-binding? I think that's part of the answer. It's not a law. You don't, as you said, Bell, you don't go to jail if you violate any of these, or like if you make an example, but it's just for us to be able to detect it and to be able to counter it.
If I can jump in on that, and I've just put it in the chat as well. It's important to understand what IHRA is. So IHRA is an intergovernmental organization. When IHRA adopted the resolution, it was literally a group of ambassadors representing their governments sitting around the plenary table who voted unanimously to approve the definition. So what non-legally binding means in that sort of context is that they were agreeing to adopt the definition, but in doing so, there weren't any obligations on the countries. The governments were not expressing a view that they would now make this a treaty that would have obligations on them back in their countries to take forward. A number of countries, very many countries, have now adopted it locally. They weren't required to by IHRA, they've done that themselves. And how they've adopted that and what it means actually varies country by country. So each country has the complete freedom to adopt or not to adopt. And if they adopt, they can adopt it in different ways. And we've seen a whole range of different models. Australia is very aware of this. We only became a full member of IHRA in the last couple of years, and we haven't yet adopted the definition. Our government is committed to adopting it, but we're working through what does that mean? How do we actually do that? At the same time, at the state level, my state, the education minister, has adopted it for use within the education department. So both for understanding and educating teachers and other ministerial staff, and for use within schools, that if they need to understand what anti-Semitism is, this is a tool they can refer to. So again, it's up to each country to decide how they use it.
That's wonderful and very useful as far as education goes. And so, of course, in Canada, at the federal level, the definition was endorsed as part of an overall anti-racism strategy. So, going a little further with the question earlier, there have been across the country here in Canada allegations that the definition threatens academic freedom. To me, it's quite obvious from the previous answers that it does not, but this is, as Mark mentioned earlier on, there was an attempt very recently right here at the University of Manitoba by the Faculty Association to reject the definition. So does this definition in any way threaten academic freedom? And secondly, are any of you aware of any cases in which the definition has been used to punish or to dismiss an academic?
I think generally it is not attacking academic freedom, but as we have faced in Germany, or I wouldn't say in Germany, maybe it's also very especially Berlin, so the capital, that we also at the Center for Research on Anti-Semitism, we have problems now, invite people for lectures, for speeches, keynotes, people who might have seen somebody 10 years ago agreeing with BDS, and also if this person has never had any contact with BDS or the boycott dimension, boycott, how is it in English?
Divestment and sanctions.
Yes. So we have now really the problem that we have to do research on any person, because if there might be some connection, it is a shitstorm against us. And there are some politicians who support this. There are some journalists, but it's really getting awful. And I think this was also, as I heard, also people in UK had some problems in that sense, that it's not attacking academic freedom in general, but that in various levels you have problems to invite people for discussion. That does not mean that you are always agreeing with somebody, but this is academic, generally academic freedom, that you might have discussions on issues with different opinions, different ways to look into the issues. So I think that there is, and this was something also which was not really understood by some journalists who, after this, I think you will mention the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, this declaration or this definition against the IHRA definition, which to my mind was not a good idea to make it against, instead of saying we as academics try to have a definition more broader maybe, but not against the IHRA definition. But this was in Germany. There was this discussion that also between journalists, that they didn't understood why people, as some academics, signed this declaration, Jerusalem Declaration, because they had really these problems. And I think that is something we have to take into account. And this is not the fault of the IHRA definition, but it's the misinterpretation of the IHRA definition.
Exactly, because in fact, the IHRA definition doesn't even mention BDS at all. And so, yes, anyone else like to step in on that?
Yeah, perhaps to Julian, to your point about these niche instances where people who perhaps made some problematic statement 10 years ago and so on, I think generally it's important to use these tools in a sort of a generous way, where we give people the benefit of the doubt, where we try to use them basically as teaching opportunities. But that said, I think it's important also to remind ourselves that it's pretty standard and pretty common for universities to have codes of conduct for students, for teachers, that basically say what is acceptable behavior. And most of these standards do include language on racism, and certainly it should be a standard to have language on anti-Semitism. I don't think that is a hindrance to academic freedom, but rather ensuring that campus space, university space is a place where Jewish students and professors are free from harassment. I think it's really important to decouple these two concepts. This is certainly something that NABRID is advocating for. Our Canadian colleagues have been really active on this topic. I myself, together with Ambassador Victor Micula in the Romanian context, have worked with the Ministry of Education to recommend to universities template code of conduct for anti-Semitism, to ensure that universities have a framework to act in such cases, I think that can be a very useful tool to have at hand.
So are any of you aware of an instance, though, where the definition, the IHRA definition itself, has been used in order to discipline or dismiss an academic?
Well, I cannot answer to that because I have to see a particular decision of a particular book quotes this as the only sort of like matrix in something that is, of course, as we say, we have to take in relation to the local context. But what I want to say, following up from my colleagues, is that the definition itself is not the problem. The definition itself is not limiting free speech. The examples, for example, that Juliane mentioned, is up to any university to decide which speakers it wants to invite. But I would think that before inviting people, they just look who they are, meaning, is it like, we can take anti-Semitism, but take misogyny or anti-LGBT statements, homophobic statements, or like Islamophobic statements. Will you invite somebody who is Islamophobic or misogynist, even though there's no definition of misogyny, and then blame it on some definition? No, you choose who you want your counterparts to be. You want to choose who are the ones who are going to educate your students are going to be. So it's up, the IHRA definition is a tool that allows you to be able to maybe explain some behaviors, but it's not the golden rule. It's up to the academic department to choose whoever they want to invite. And anti-Semitism, one of the red flags they should always keep in mind, together with many other kinds of phobias and forms of discrimination.
Absolutely. And so go ahead.
We had an example in Germany. Achille Membe, he's a post-colonial, he's one of the most famous post-colonial post-colonial studies researcher, and it was really the case that he was invited to give a high keynote speech, and after somebody figured out that for 10 years ago, what sometimes also misinterpretation of something which he has written, and he was the invitation was cancelled. At the end, the whole event was cancelled because of Corona. But that was really a case in Germany that he couldn't speak because of this misinterpretation of the IHRA
Of the definition. Now, we mentioned just earlier that there have been alternative definitions that have been or are being promoted, sometimes from the left, most recently by academics, and of course the one that we're probably going to refer to now is the Jerusalem Declaration, the so-called Jerusalem Declaration. So I wonder if any of you would like to comment on these alternative definitions, and in particular this new one, which has gotten a lot of news or gotten into the news. How is the Jerusalem Declaration different from the IHRA definition? And does this definition have any impact on the adoption or endorsement of the IHRA definition itself?
Bill, if I can just also jump back to the previous question for a second.
Sure.
In Germany, Austria, other countries, there are a range of laws that predate the IHRA definition, which deal with anti-Semitism, that criminalize various forms of behavior. David Irving spoke at universities in the UK before the IHRA definition. He would likely still be able to speak at some universities after adoption, okay? Because it depends how you adopt it and what you use it for, as we've discussed. He could not go and speak in Germany. And that's got nothing to do with the IHRA definition.
That's right. Okay? It's the hate laws that exist in Germany that do not exist in most of our other countries.
well, I think there's 11 countries where there's similar laws. But the issue is that there are existing frameworks in many countries which do criminalize certain forms of hate speech. And the IHRA definition, if it's adopted for education purposes, if it's adopted for interpretation purposes, could very well lead to an existing law being applied in a way that it should be applied anyway. It just makes it easier for it to get to the right result. And potentially it might lead to certain things, not being found to be anti-Semitic, because looking at the definition, it does raise that need for nuance, etc. So, that's the first thing. The IHRA definition highlights the need for interpretation. It highlights that, again, it's for creating understanding. The Jerusalem Declaration goes into, it's much longer than the IHRA definition. It goes into a lot more detail, okay? The level of bullet points, etc. There actually remove the level of interpretation that's needed. And there's also a lot in it that, frankly, is really problematic. There's one line in there which seems to be trying to bring back the old rejected UN declaration of Zionism is racism. Now, that led to untold problems. That's a feature of the Cold War. It's not helpful. But the main difference between the two is the IHRA definition is something that comes from governments. It's something that governments have adopted first within IHRA and then adopted through their democratic processes in the different countries in whatever manner that country decided to adopt it. That puts it in a very different space from something that is, a group of people who have come together who have just said, here is our definition. You can't compare them side by side. It's like a group of people turning around and saying, you know what, we're not actually happy with the criminal justice system and what it defines as murder, manslaughter. Here is our alternative. Now there is controversy. Oh, no, there's not controversy. Okay, they're just not the same thing.
I think it's legitimate that academics try to have a definition on anti-Semitism, which, by the way, is not longer as the IHRA definition, because the definition, the real definition of the Jerusalem Declaration says anti-Semitism is discrimination, prejudice, hostility, or violence against Jews as Jews, or Jewish institutions as Jewish. So the definition is fine. It's not the problem. I think it's the guidelines and the bullet points, and it says that also a misinterpretation of the term working definition. They mean that it was called working definition because it is to be worked on it. That is not the case, because this title of working definition comes from this original UMC, European Monitoring Center, Xenophobia and Racism definition, which was created in 2005, because it was clear that and it was also created with people from the OSCE, from the Organization for Security in Europe, and its human rights department, ODIHR. So it was clear that, for example, Russia will never accept this definition as a definition. So it was called working definition. That is a diplomatic way of bringing further such things. And so these people are not understanding what working definition means. It's a pity that I didn't ask also IHRA people, and I think that the problem of this definition is that it's against the IHRA definition, instead of bringing an academic view, a scholarly view on this, because we had in the expert group for the German parliament, we also provided a definition, a longer one with all these different forms of anti-Semitism. But So this is no problem, but we had also, we put also in the IHRA definition as a very good tool for practical work. So I think that that is the point, that they try to go against it instead of trying to have their scholarly view on it, which is no problem generally.
I do think we can't take both the Jerusalem Declaration and the IHRA definition have a few sentences as the definition, and then have additional material, additional commentary, examples, etc. In both cases, I don't think we can separate the two. The documents stand as complete documents.
Yeah, and I think we've been pretty clear at the IHRA that they do, that one cannot separate the illustrative examples from the definition, because that's another rumor that's out there, that, oh, it's only the definition in the box.
But I think the same goes with the Jerusalem Declaration. You can't say that the few words up the front are fine and there's issues with the rest of it, because that will just get lost. If people try and use it, they're going to use it completely. And the details there, I mean, it doesn't say, you know, it tries to say that BDS is not anti-Semitic. Now, it's possible to have some form of limited boycott of things in the territories that might be done in such a way that it isn't anti-Semitic. Theoretically, that's possible. The BDS movement, which is a movement, which has an ideology, which there is a lot of research into, is an anti-Semitic movement. So to put into it that BDS is not anti-Semitic is, you know, it's calling black white.
Leon or Alina, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you, Belle. I'm a bit hesitant to jump into this debate, because for me, it's not a beauty contest. It's not who has the better definition, because I think that's what it's becoming. We can all sit, and your participants, we're 73 people in this room, we can all come up with a definition. And, you know, for example, the other definition has no examples about COVID. And you say, you know, now it's COVID, you have to make new examples, and, you know, and this, that. I think it will never end. You know, we can make a definition every day. As we said, anti-Semitism is something constantly developing and changing ways. And so that's why I don't want to go into this discussion of which definition is better. IHRA has proven its efficacy as being the standard, has been sort of like, and somehow it's a success of the IHRA definition has triggered all the other definitions, because it has shown its effect and its ability to be used. And I will go back to what Andre said at the beginning in the first question, where he said, it's not so much about the definition itself, it's about training the people of how to use it and give them the tools, and sort of like what we call the implementation beyond the formal adoption, let's say, or endorsement. So I think that's what we need. It's not just another round. We can spend all day and define anti-Semitism, and, you know, each one of us will come with a new definition. And is this how we fight anti-Semitism? So I think everybody of your participants will agree with that. There's no doubt.
Now, in Canada, we've seen certainly some egregious examples of students being excluded on university campuses from student government bodies, etc. And interestingly enough, similar to what you mentioned, Andre, there was an issue at one university about kosher food and equating the desire for Jewish students to have access to kosher food to being Zionists, and of course Zionism being portrayed in a very negative manner. So why do you think it's important for universities to adopt this definition? And I'm going to turn to you, Alina, first, given your experience with student organizations, although I know some of you have that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the sense behind this has already been touched upon outside of the university context. The idea that we need a tool to actually make reference to when we speak of anti-Semitism, to help us understand its complexity. But I think the point that is specific to the university context is this idea of really building trust with Jewish students, making Jewish students feel included in university spaces that have become increasingly more hostile to them. I think adoption of the IHRA definition really is the starting point. Generally, having this discussion about the definition has taken up so much space, whereas I think we would all agree this should be just the initial tool that we use to then move forward to actually achieve the goal of tackling anti-Semitism rather than just establishing what it is. So I think once we have this component, the question on campus really is, how do we create a space that celebrates Jewish students, that highlights Jewish contributions to history, to physics, to various topics that students are taking within a university context, and really goes a little bit beyond this question of, how do we tackle anti-Semitism? I think that's where our university efforts should be focused.
Anyone else like to comment further on this particular issue?
I think the question of academic freedom comes from both directions.
Yes.
When we had the academic boycotts in the UK, I was on the executive for the National Postgraduate Committee at the time, and the National Postgraduate Committee formally at its annual conference took a resolution against the boycotts, and it took a position in the name of academic freedom, because the very definition of an academic boycott, whether it's preventing students coming from Israel to study at UK universities, whether it's reviewers refusing to review papers if they come from, from Israelis. And this boycott had an additional twist that if you were Israeli, it then depended what religion you were and whether you took particular political stands or not, then they might excuse you, which really highlights just how bad it was. The position the graduate students took was that we were not going to discriminate based on nationality, and that any form of boycott that was based on nationality in an academic setting undermined academic freedom. Therefore, we're against it, end of discussion. And I think that's really the position for universities as well. The issue with kosher food, what was said in the UK, is it's anti-Semitic in effect, even if it isn't anti-Semitic in intention. Because if you ban Israeli goods, which is what they were talking about, and that is the only kosher goods that were available, and therefore Jewish students have to struggle in order to eat, that's a problem. That is creating an environment that is discriminatory. I must say in Australia, we have a very similar issue at the moment, not with kosher food, but with halal food. Mm-hmm. There are people that actively are opposing halal food in order to try and cause discrimination against Muslims, to push Muslims out of their cities, etc. It's the exact same story. So I think we need to oppose that and say, where you try and make life difficult so that people of a particular religion in particular, in this case, can't live their lives, that's discrimination.
Indeed, indeed. Would anyone like to speak about the relationship of anti-Semitism and intersectionality?
Well, I think that ties in actually quite nicely with the question about anti-Semitism on campus, because campus tends to be such a progressive space and really the place where we're at the forefront of the intersectionality discussion. And I think it's really important for the Jewish community to engage on the topic. And unfortunately, it's been quite difficult to do that lately. I think among intersectional activists, Israel has started to be constantly described as a white colonial power, and in that context, Jews as holder of some sort of ultimate white privilege, Jewish privilege, something that even supersedes white privilege. And there's this sense that Jewish victimhood and the experience of being victimized as a Jew is somehow invalid. Progressive Jews are often being excluded from supporting and being part of liberation movements. And I think while this is a very unsettling reality to confront. It's really important for Jewish communities, individuals, and institutions to really not lose grasp of their own narrative, and to make sure that wherever there are these conversations about Jews, that Jews are actually at the table. I think it's really important to not shy away from this intersectional conversation, because it's really crucial that ourselves within the Jewish community acknowledge intersectional experiences of Jewish women, of Jewish people of color, of LGBTQI Jews, who often face discrimination on top of discrimination. And by just, putting this whole conversation aside, we're completely missing that. So I'm very much of a proponent of engaging in this often tense conversations and spaces.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add anything?
I will if no one else wants. Leon, you go first.
Maybe very briefly, because Belle, the issue is a very big issue. I've been working at the United Nations Human Rights Framework for many years, and I think the best way to fight racism is if all the groups come together from all sides. So if you only focus on anti-Semitism or anti-Black discrimination or homophobia, you won't win the war. You only win the war if we all come together. So I see it as a joint call for arms. That's what we have been doing, coalition building, reaching out, explaining our position, getting other people on board. I think that's the best way to fight racism together, instead of sort of like each one focusing. It's important to focus and to explain the particularities like we do today of anti-Semitism. But that doesn't exclude us in reaching out and bringing people into the debate and enlarging our alliances.
I think that it's important to be together and to fight together. But I think it's important, at least from a standpoint of academic research, that we also look into the differences of anti-Semitism and racism, for example, because anti-Semitism generally thinks that Jews are powerful, that they have money. And if you look into other forms of racism against Sinti and Roma, for example, it's always that they are allegedly underprivileged, and so there are really differences, and racist forms of anti-Semitism are not anymore so generally. You can find them in right extreme groups and so on, but it's more this Israel collected anti-Semitism and what we call secondary anti-Semitism. That means the forms which blame Jews, that we cannot come to normality because they always remember us on the Holocaust and so on. So these two forms after, I would say, the Second World War. So it is, because sometimes if you go again in fighting, and this is, I think, very important. But if you look into the differences, it's very important also to see the similarities, certainly.
There's intersectionality and there's intersectionality. What I mean by that is, in the academic space, the term intersectionality has been very problematic because of what Alina...
Oh, you're muted, Andre. Sorry,
there we go, unmute. So what I'm saying is there's intersectionality and intersectionality. In the academic space, there's been a lot of discussion which, like Alina was talking about in relation to Israel, it's actually a broader discussion you can have even without Israel, where this Jewish privilege question comes in. You're Jewish, therefore you don't understand racism, you don't understand discrimination, therefore you're not allowed to be at this table. You're not, so it's intersectionality that actually denies the existence of anti-Semitism. And a lot of the early work in intersectionality came from that perspective. and it came out of academic departments where there was a level of anti-Semitism within scholarship in certain fields. And that's still a problem today. I agree, you know, what Leon said before. I started working just on anti-Semitism. And then 2012, we formed the Online Hate Prevention Institute to take the lessons from fighting anti-Semitism and to work across all the different types of online hate. But in doing that, we still very often need to stand up on the anti-Semitism point. I had an issue on Holocaust Memorial Day where an Indigenous person, you know, commented on our Holocaust Memorial thread talking about the Indigenous Holocaust. And I removed the post and messaged them privately and just said, look, that language is problematic. That's why I've removed your post, right? You're not being banned or anything, but we need to keep the language appropriate, and that's not. And it got into a very detailed discussion where they were then accusing me of racism for not letting them control their narrative. If they want to use the word Holocaust, they have the right to do that. Okay, which is completely them disregarding the fact that they're moving into then harming others. And that's, you know, similarly, we had a meeting with Facebook, a group of different NGOs from different communities, myself and another Jewish representative there. And the other groups started getting into the, you know, the competitive, the Olympics of who suffered worst. And the two Jews in the room just looked at each other and said, we're just not buying into this. But this is where a lot of the discussion is at the moment within society more broadly. And there's a lot of groups which haven't had a very strong voice on discrimination in the past who are now finding their voice. And we need to work with them. But in doing that, we mustn't, you know, we mustn't give away our space. And we do need to insist that it's the Jewish community that, you know, the Jewish community that gets to lead on anti-Semitism. It's not a problem just for the Jews, it's a problem for society. But just like every other minority, each, you know, the Jews, like every other group, should be able to define their own persecution. And that's important.
I have one last question before I see we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. And before I move on to that, I would like to ask you what you're each encountering in your home countries and communities, and what impact the definition itself has had on your work. Juliana, would you like to start?
Yes, I would say the impact of the IHRA definition hasn't been so much before. It was debated now in the framework of these different definitions coming out, because it was really, I would say, it was not so much known. Okay, there was the resolution of the German Parliament on BDS. Maybe this was also, it was in 2018, I think. So from that point on, the IHRA definition might have had really more public attraction because it was mentioned in the press and so on. On our personal work, or my personal work, I think it was important, especially in the framework of educational tools, and because I'm also going to teacher trainings and so on. So it was important to have it there and to make clear that this is a definition they can use for their work.
Alina?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately what I think has been key in this process of trying to mainstream the IHRA definition is just the amount of people that we've managed to get it in front of. I think working as Jewish professionals in the Jewish advocacy bubble, it's very easy to get a sense that everyone really understands the issues and everything is quite straightforward. So perhaps we forget sometimes how little knowledge and awareness there really is out there. So just to think about the thousands and thousands of policymakers, police officers, and other elements of law enforcement, judiciary, education have gotten a chance to just visit this definition is already a huge added value. And then I think the more concrete elements that we've already spoken about have been very valuable in aiding law enforcement to identify anti-Semitic bias, aiding that data collection, which was basically the starting point. Generally having this robust process of being able to identify and address anti-Semitism, it's definitely visible. But for me, essentially, it's just creating an awareness about the issue that has been really valuable.
Thank you. Leon?
Thank you, Belle. For me, working again at the UN context, the other definition has been super helpful. As we have all experienced due to COVID, or not due to COVID, in times of COVID, we have seen a big surge of anti-Semitism, in particular online. And this reality has been understood and reported by the UN Secretary General, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion, by the Special Representative of the Alliance of Civilizations, and many other, the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So they have all come out in statements against this rise of anti-Semitism. And the next step in all their thinking is we have to define it in order to fight it. You cannot just condemn anti-Semitism. What are you condemning? So that's why the UN Secretary General, the Special Rapporteur, continue to say how it's important to have this definition, to use this definition, to consult the definition. And that's why we're seeing a lot of progress in this field. And that's why, as a guide, it has been invaluable in trying to inform policymakers about what's the next step.
Okay, as I mentioned before, we're still looking at the question of adoption nationally for Australia, but there was a series of anti-Semitic incidents in a school in Australia, in my state, in Victoria. The government, the Minister for Education, called for an independent inquiry. The inquiry was led by a non-Jewish investigator. I was brought in to assist as the Jewish person to provide expertise. And very quickly, it was decided to base the inquiry on the IHRA working definition. The investigator used the definition throughout each of the complaints they were looking at. They came to me for interpretation when they needed it. There was one incident where I went to Yehuda Bauer, where I thought it needed further expertise. I won't get into the story, but Yehuda was excellent. And, you know, according to the definition, the particular incident there was not anti-Semitic. That's why we wanted to get expertise, because it was a case where the media was saying something was anti-Semitic and the expert view was, well, no, it's not. So, you know, the definition's been used there. It's been very useful. The other thing we did do was take the definition for doing online monitoring. And the software my organization created for reporting instances of anti-Semitism in social media, it gives you a number of categories of anti-Semitism, 4, I think, to start with. And then when you pick one of the categories to say whether the example you're reporting is related to the Holocaust or related to Israel or related to traditional anti-Semitism, etc., it then asks you to subcategorize it. And in all, there are 31 different categories. Every single one of those categories comes from a phrase or line in either the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism or the IHRA working definition of Holocaust denial and distortion. IHRA actually has 3 working definitions. So, you know, we've used both. And again, that was very powerful to be able to link it directly to, you know, to particular phrases and parts of it. And I think increasingly we're going to see examples, not just say that this example is anti-Semitic under the IHRA definition, but it meets this part of the IHRA definition, and here's an explanation as to why. And I think that's useful, even just for education purposes. But, you know, if there is a rule that you can't be anti-Semitic, let's say it's in an employment contract, that you can't be racist, etc. If there is an in-house investigation or something and you use the IHRA definition, it needs to be explained. What exactly is being breached, and explain it in detail and explain the circumstances.
Thank you. So we have two interesting questions, and this first one actually, what you just said is a good segue. So with regard to denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, does non-Zionism and post-Zionism unequivocally apply as anti-Semitism? Obviously taking into account that this is not applied as a double standard. Who'd like to take that on first?
I thought I'd typed a reply into that one.
Oh, it's possible. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you?
No, it's okay.
I probably don't have access to that.
I can't see it now. The short answer is unequivocally no. Okay, it's complicated. Everything is always complicated, unfortunately. The discussion amongst Israeli Jews over the nature of the state of Israel is 100% a legitimate discussion. Taking that same discussion and trying to use it outside of Israel in order to create political pressure on Israel, because you know, rather than having a democratic process, you try and impose things from outside, that's problematic. Having a discussion that's got nothing to do with Jews, with people who aren't Jews, trying to tell Jews what their decision for what their self-determination should be. Well, you know, if I compare it to Australia, we've got discussions going on amongst the Indigenous community at the moment about a treaty process, etc. The first stage is for the Indigenous community to decide what it is they want to bring to the table for the wider community to decide on. Right? It can't be imposed by people who aren't part of the group whose self-determination is in question. So it's complicated.
Thank you. And then finally, from that question was from Ellie Friedman, and then finally from Ben Bader, who says, this is a very interesting discussion. Thank you so much. In particular, I appreciate you talking about the need to be differentiated and to account for complexity by stressing that the IHRA definition needs to be carefully interpreted depending on context. However, it seems to me that the controversy about the IHRA definition has become a battlefield about Israeli politics. Can it still be useful under these circumstances?
I think yes, it is really useful. Also, if there are these debates, and it's certainly true that that the debates are based very much on this question, legitimate criticism or not, and how far can you go, and so on. But this is a debate which is apart from the definition, because the definition is clear, and then there is the misinterpretation or the interpretation, but I think it is still as a tool for practical work, but also as a statement to be against, for a state, a club, an NGO, to give this statement to be against anti-Semitism. And this is, I think, a very important point of the IHRA definition.
Anyone like to add anything?
Perhaps tying in this question with the one of the earlier questions on the practicality of the definition, I just wanted to flag for viewers interesting and very useful handbook developed by the European Commission in partnership with IHRA, which literally looks at how the definition has been implemented and has a very practical angle in different fields: law enforcement, judiciary, civil society, allocating funds, this sort of thing. And I think connecting to this question, the way we make the definition useful, the way we make sure it's not kind of hijacked by other conversations, is precisely taking these very concrete examples where we've made great use of the definition in preventing anti-Semitism, in shielding the Jewish community from prejudice, and focus on those and really reinforce the positive impact of the IHRA definition.
I see that one more question has come in. I see that, Andre, you are typing an answer, but I wonder if you would perhaps, any of you like to answer this question. Yeah. And it's one that comes up quite often. Are there any circumstances under which a legitimate boycott of Israeli products be done? Now, I'm not sure, Harold, exactly what you mean by a legitimate boycott. I guess, and I think we did speak to this a little bit earlier. I mean, certainly I have seen Israelis in the shuk looking at produce that comes from the territories and put it back down and heard them say, well, I'm not buying that. I don't buy anything from the territories. But I think Harold is really speaking about outside of Israel. So, Andre, what would you?
Yeah, look, I repeat what I said before, that it's not only about the intention, it's about the effect. So firstly, an individual deciding not to buy particular products is their right, and I think that's perfectly fine. An individual trying to take away somebody else's rights to buy a product, that becomes a lot more problematic, particularly if that product is the only option that somebody else might have. So again, if you're boycotting, if there's two brands of kosher hummus, one which is locally made and one which is from the territories, and you decide to not have the one from the territories, either as a decision of the shop or a decision of a student union on, on campus, we're not going to stock that one, we're going to stock this one, fine, no problem. Okay. If your choice is a non-kosher hummus and a kosher hummus which comes from the territory, and that's the only one you can access through your supplier, and you therefore decide that you're going to boycott the only kosher option, that in effect becomes anti-Semitic. That becomes a problem because you're now having a negative impact on Jewish members of that community, whether or not that was your intention.
And really human rights, because the right to practice one's religion is a human right.
Yeah, so that's, sorry, I'd say that's the first thing. The other thing is, I think it's okay to be boycotting a particular company because of, let's say human rights abuses or whatever it is that company is responsible for. Again, unless you're going to actually have that human rights, that negative impact. So I think there's legitimacy there. There can be legitimacy in taking a position on the territories, provided you put in the effort to make sure you have other alternatives. So someone that really wanted to do that, there are ways to do it, but it needs to be done with a lot of care and a lot of thought to look after the impact on the people themselves. And even, we saw the issue with SodaStream, where boycotts of SodaStream were actually anti-human rights, because SodaStream was doing a really good job about treating people equally and creating employment for both Jews and Arabs in the territories. And the boycott there actually was just anti-peace, anti everything that the people that were boycotting said they stood for.
Yes, absolutely. So... Any final thoughts before I thank you all? Well, if not, I want to thank all of you, our wonderful, wonderful panelists, Juliana, Leon, Alina, and Andre. I really hope that this discussion has clarified things around the IHRA definition a little better for the people that will be listening. We are recording this program and it will be up on the Jewish Heritage Center's YouTube channel in the coming days. Also, thank you to the audience that turned out today. We know that when we see numbers at the bottom of the screen, that often represents more than one person in each household, of course. And I also want to bring to your attention that there will be 2 more events in our Saul and Florence Caney virtual spring series. Registration is free and available now on the events section of our website, jhcwc.org/events, or by writing to me at the Jewish Heritage Center at jhcwc.org. Our second event will take place on May 13th, and will feature Bob Ray, who is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, in conversation with Erwin Kotler, Canada's newly appointed special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism, as well as being the chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. The two will be discussing the current states of human rights around the globe. And our third speaker on June the 6th at noon Winnipeg time will be Ephraim Halevi, author, lawyer, intelligence expert, and former head of Mossad, who helped bring about the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan, and who was our 2012 Saul and Florence Caney Distinguished Lecturer. He will be speaking about the future of the Middle East post-pandemic. Please stay tuned as well for information about our autumn programming. The Jewish Heritage Center, of course, welcomes donations to help us continue our important work. All donations are tax deductible. Thank you to all of you. Be safe and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.